Hi, I'm Lee McFadden, and I'd like to tell you about a trip Tony Quinn and I made to Los Angeles in January 2022. Tony planned the trip as a break from COVID lockdowns, and I was the beneficiary. He commuted from Sacramento, I from Nashville. While we had both made past visits to La La Land, we had sightseeing gaps we wanted to fill. Among them, 2 presidential libraries, the Getty Art Museum, a Warner Brothers studio tour, and much more. No visit to Los Angeles would be complete without giving the automobile in California's freeways a starring role. Here we are on Wilshire Blvd, heading to our first lunch stop, Cantor Brothers Delicatessen. It's not just about the food, it's about the history. An outside mural documents protests in the area, which was predominantly Jewish when the deli opened its doors in 1931. Its location just down the street from CBS Studios has assured a steady flow of celebrity customers through 3 generations of ownership. Cantor's Deli features live music, and the decor hasn't changed since the 1950s. Our first sightseeing stop was back to the Ice Age to check out some now extinct Los Angeles area residents who died more than 14,000 years ago. The earliest date back 44,000 years. In addition to these titans of the Ice Age, researchers have found fossils of more than 600 species so far, even fleas that fed on the animals trapped in the tar pits. This lake, surrounded by the modern city, is just one of more than 100 excavation sites that have been explored in this immediate area since the early 1900s. The name La Brea is the Spanish word for tar, but tar is a misnomer. The black goo is actually naturally occurring asphalt, not tar, which does not occur naturally. But the Spanish name stuck. Each pit can reflect an entirely different Ice Age time capsule, serving up plant and animal fossils as many as 20,000 years apart. Here in this pit, searchers have dug down 15 feet so far and expect to go another 5 feet and still find fossils. So far, the La Brea Tar Pits have yielded 3.5 million fossils, and the digging continues. Inside the museum, we see skeletons and full-size replicas. Here's a skeleton of Harlan's ground sloth. This one is of an American mastodon. It's shorter and stockier than its mammoth cousins. Now meet an antique bison, not too different from those of today. This sweet little kitty is a California saber-toothed cat, about the size of today's African lions. These fangs could really do some damage. Here's a full-size replica of the Columbian mammoth, cousin of the woolly mammoth. This is the Columbian mammoth's skeleton. This case contains skulls of dire wolves, displaying about 400 of the 1,600 that have been found here so far. Dire wolves are a separate species from today's wolves. Check out the fossil lab where scientists clean, study, and prepare fossils for exhibit. Imagine being supervised continuously by members of the general public. Now we're off to our lodging at the Hilton Los Angeles at Universal City, smack dab in the middle of the movie industry. It was one of the few hotels we could find that had dining facilities open during the COVID pandemic. The next morning, we were ready to put the Ice Age behind us and jump feet first into the Cold War. We were headed north, about 40 miles to the beautiful Simi Valley, to visit Ronald Reagan. A sign welcomed us to his presidential library and museum. We found it overlooking a rugged landscape that seemed tailor-made for Western movies. And we joined the flow of visitors who have numbered more than 5 million since the museum opened in 1991. At the entrance, we were greeted not by the president, but by his wife and First Lady, Nancy Davis Reagan, a former actress who was not to be upstaged. The dramatic entryway inside led us directly to the first couple, and I was invited to join them. A holographic image of the president gave us some historical context.
As well, Mother Teresa visited this room. So did Margaret Thatcher and Mikhail Gorbachev. Unfortunately, for all the power possessed by an American president, there are some things beyond his control.
24 galleries told the story of Ronald Reagan's youth, college years, Hollywood stardom, 2 terms as California governor, and key events of his presidency. In a notable trip to Berlin, President Reagan called out, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." 2 years later, the wall came down as the Cold War ended, and the first major pieces of the wall were brought out of Germany to be displayed at the Reagan Museum. But not to be outdone, gowns of the First Lady were also on display. Parts of the museum were interactive. Here I got to try making an inaugural address using a teleprompter. I must have done well. The Oval Office was awaiting me. Actually, the museum features a full-size replica of Ronald Reagan's Oval Office. It's decorated in warm, earthy colors and Western art. When we entered the main pavilion next to the museum, there was a large private event taking place. It turned out to be an FBI luncheon, and we weren't invited. The diners were gathered under the nose of a Boeing 707, which turned out to be the very Air Force One that had flown 7 U.S. presidents, from Nixon to George H.W. Bush. The Reagan Library offered to build a hangar for it, and that was no small undertaking, since its length is 153 feet, about half the length of a football field. When the plane was decommissioned, it was disassembled, brought here in sections by truck, and reassembled. The pavilion was only partly finished, and the final wall was added once the plane was inside. Now is the chance we had been waiting for, an opportunity to go aboard and look around. Air Force One could fly at 42,000 feet and had a range of more than 7,600 miles. Tony seems to be making himself right at home. This office isn't oval, but we can guess its likely occupant. And he's never far from his beloved jelly beans. The conference room looks ready for business. And an ever-present military aid is close at hand. The plane can hold up to 52 passengers, plus crew, but this tiny gallery hardly seems adequate to serve them. Beyond Air Force One, the Reagan Museum also displays Marine One, the presidential helicopter used for short hauls for up to 15 passengers. Vehicles used in the President's motorcade are also on display. Talk about vanity plates. We went outside to visit the gravesite of our nation's 40th president and Mrs. Reagan. He passed away in 2004 after battling Alzheimer's disease in the last years of his life. She died nearly 12 years later in 2016. Nearby is a recreation of the White House Rose Garden. And the view behind it is stunning. Take a look. There was a close call in the fall of 2019, however, when a brush fire disrupted internet communications at the museum and spoiled the landscaping. Fortunately, the damage was modest, and Ronald Reagan's shining city on a hill continues to inspire. Now we're going in search of even more scenic inspiration, this time to the Griffith Observatory. Perched on the south face of Mount Hollywood, it no longer looks at stars, but instead overlooks the Los Angeles basin. It has a popular planetarium and museum, but most visitors come for the terrestrial view. From here, we can zoom in on the iconic Hollywood sign. Looking down, however, we have to accept on faith that Los Angeles is spread out before us. The smog obscures our view. As our eyes penetrate layer after layer of haze, we see one cluster of buildings after another. We ask, where is the downtown? But as satirist Dorothy Parker observed, Los Angeles is 72 suburbs in search of a city. The Griffith Observatory vantage point is a magnet for young people. You can be sure they brought their cell phones and will share the day generously on social media. We know we're in California when street vendors are peddling all manner of New Age books. As the sun goes down, we do too, searching for Los Angeles. Back in our hotel after a full day of breathtaking California scenery, we look down to see fireflies on freeways. And we behold the lights of nearby Universal Studios and its theme park. The next morning, we headed southeast, about 37 miles, to the small suburban town of Yorba Linda. Why, you ask? Well, Yorba Linda is the birthplace of Richard Nixon and the site of his presidential library and museum. In contrast to the Reagan Museum, we felt the Nixon Museum had less glamour, but more substance. Before becoming president, Nixon had been a lawyer, a World War II officer, a California congressman and senator, and vice president under Dwight Eisenhower. In 1952, he gave a television speech that saved his place on the Republican ticket, his famous Checkers speech, and I finally got to hear it.
One other thing I probably should tell you, because if I don't, they'll probably be saying this about me too. We did get something to give after the election. A man down in Texas heard on the radio mention the fact that our two youngsters would like to have dogs. And believe it or not, the day before we left in this campaign trip, we got a message from Union Station, Baltimore, saying they had a package for us. We went down to get it. You know what it was? It was a little Cocker Spaniel dog in a crate that he sent all the way from Texas. Black and white, fine. And our little girl Tricia, the 6-year-old, named Checker. And you know, the kids, like all kids, love the dogs. And I just want to say this right now, regardless of what they say about it, they're going to keep it. And now finally, I know that you wonder whether or not I am going to stay on the Republican ticket or resign. Let me say this. I don't believe that I ought to quit, because I'm not a quitter.
8 years later, in Nixon's first presidential campaign, TV didn't treat him quite so well. He looked haggard next to the more charismatic John Kennedy, and he lost by a razor-thin margin. After an unsuccessful run for governor of California, Nixon finally found his way into the Oval Office in 1968. Here's how it looked during his presidency, with decor inspired by California gold. President Nixon's greatest achievements were in the area of foreign policy, and the museum presents them big as life. His historic visit to China in 1972 eventually led to the establishment of diplomatic relations. Then in that same year, he achieved détente with the Soviet Union by signing 2 landmark arms control treaties. Meanwhile, the Vietnam War was dragging on until Nixon signed the Paris Peace Accords, which ended U.S. involvement in 1973. That brought the troops home, and also ended the military draft. When we glanced up at the ceiling, we beheld another event of significance, the Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969. John Kennedy had set the lofty goal. Richard Nixon presided over its achievement. But not all history was so uplifting. The story of the Watergate break-in and Nixon's complicity in the cover-up is given prominence, warts and all. Facing likely impeachment and the complete loss of his political support, Nixon resigned from office on August 9, 1974. He became the only American president to have done so. With that sad end to the Nixon story as president, we walked outside into the sunshine and fresh air. Nixon would go on to spend the next 20 years writing his memoirs and 9 other books, traveling the world, and rehabbing his image into that of an elder statesman and foreign policy expert. The Pat Nixon Amphitheater provides a beautiful setting for special events, and in this case, preparation for a wedding. High-end, I would say, judging by the film crew. Let's sneak a peek. As we wander the acreage that used to be the Nixon family's lemon orchard, we find a Marine One helicopter, which had been used by several presidents. Inside the museum, we had seen a model of the same Air Force One 707 that we had toured at the Reagan Museum. After 7 presidents, it finally had landed. Now we come to the birthplace and early boyhood home of Richard Milhous Nixon, which had been lovingly preserved. Most of the furniture is original. He was born in 1913 to a Quaker family and had 4 other brothers, 2 of whom died in childhood. As a boy, young Richard never learned to read music, but he played the piano at church and also learned to play the saxophone, clarinet, accordion, and violin. The graves of the 37th President of the United States and his First Lady are near the home. Richard died in 1994 of a stroke. He was 81. Pat had preceded him by 1 year. Having visited 2 very serious presidential museums, it's time for a little frivolity. Hollywood Boulevard provides the contrast, and lots of tourists. Here we find an eclectic assortment of popular museums. Tacky tourist traps? Well, maybe, but Los Angeles visitors love them. The theaters on Hollywood Boulevard are often the scene of major movie premieres. The El Capitan is owned by Disney, and guess what it shows? The Dolby Theater is best known for hosting the Academy Awards ceremonies each year. But Grauman's Chinese Theater is probably the most famous of all. The Chinese electronics company TCL bought naming rights, so it's now called TCL Chinese Theater. Some of the biggest premieres are held here, and its distinctive red pagoda motif is a landmark dating back 95 years. What sets it apart from all other movie palaces is the forecourt, filled with the handprints, footprints, and signatures of some of the biggest stars from Hollywood's golden age. Take a walk with me and check out a few you might recognize. Many are addressed personally to impresario Sid Grauman, who had the theater built. You might have noticed a few stars on the sidewalks. The Hollywood Walk of Fame is a more current development dating back to 1960. I wanted to see them all, but Tony convinced me 18 blocks is a long way to walk to see 2,600 stars. But I can't resist sharing a few with you. Notice that symbols indicate whether the honoree's fame derives from movies, television, music, stage, radio, or theater. Fictional characters are included. The singing cowboy Gene Autry has garnered the most recognition of anyone, earning stars in 5 separate categories. Enjoy the walk as we wind up our stroll down Hollywood Boulevard. Now we drive 12 miles northeast of LA to the well-established suburb of Pasadena, home of Caltech and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, but better known for the Rose Bowl, an annual rose parade. Headquarters for the Tournament of Roses is in an impressive mansion built out of chewing gum. But I digress. First, we must walk through a garden of roses to get to it. But alas, the bushes appear to have been picked bare to adorn the parade floats on New Year's Day. Meanwhile, Tony looks right at home on the mansion's veranda. And the building itself bears the name Wrigley, and is one of several imposing homes owned by the chewing gum family. Needless to say, it has landmark status. Near Pasadena and the adjoining suburb of Altadena, we find the Eaton Canyon Nature Center. It's a natural preserve located at the base of the San Gabriel Mountains. This part of the Eaton Wash is dry right now, but there are times when the water flows freely. From here, it's about a 2-mile hike up to Eaton Falls, which drops about 40 feet into a waist-high pool at its base. I went partway until I ran across a flowing stream that I would need to cross on foot. Others were enjoying the sport of doing so, but I was wearing my only pair of shoes, so I took up an observation post with my camera poised to record the mishaps of others. Nobody fell in, at least while I was watching, so I returned to resume our sightseeing drive. We passed some beautiful homes with views to die for. California living at its best, at least until wildfires and mudslides threaten the good life. Meanwhile, you can rest assured that selling prices and tax bills here are out of reach for ordinary Californians. Now we head for another out-of-reach location, the Getty Center, to see a little art. You can't drive up to this mountaintop museum, so we took a hover train. That is, we rode up on a cushion of air pulled by a cable about 3/4 of a mile in about 4 minutes. We were about to see part of what wealthy oil man J. Paul Getty left as his legacy to us. He was an avid collector of pre-20th century art and antiquities. He died about 20 years before this $1.3 billion showplace opened in 1997. It's easily worth 3 times that amount today, and is situated on 24 acres, covering a hilltop in the Santa Monica Mountains overlooking Los Angeles. Upon arrival at the top, I was immediately struck by the captivating architecture, a major work of modernist art in and of itself. The entire complex of buildings was designed by architect Richard Meyer, and included not just the museum, but the Getty Research Institute, the Getty Conservation Institute, the Getty Foundation, and the J. Paul Getty Trust. At one time, Fortune magazine anointed this famously frugal petroleum tycoon as the richest living American. As you can see in this satellite view, the architect liked to work in combinations of squares and circles to place and unite the structures. And on ground level, he used grids, many composed of 30-inch squares, to organize walls, windows, and paving. Honey-colored travertine stone from Italy covers much of the facade. The campus includes fountains, pools, and gardens, as well as multiple galleries, shops, and places to eat. Plus, there's outdoor sculpture to behold. Unlike the classic paintings, drawings, and manuscripts found inside, the outdoor art is modern, a contribution of Fran and Ray Stark, who brought the Getty Center's collection into the 20th century. The Getty Museum is known for its permanent collection, but it also hosts temporary exhibits. The work of Hans Holbein the Younger was being featured when we were there. This German-Swiss painter captured many members of Henry VIII's court in England. Galleries on the upper level benefit from natural light, using computer-controlled skylights blended with artificial light. The flow of people is continuous, as the museum typically draws 1.8 million visitors a year. Enjoy sampling some of the masters we saw on our visit. I expect you'll recognize some familiar names and paintings. Now it's time to leave the museum, and Tony bids farewell to Alberto Giacometti's Standing Woman 1. Soon we're back on the train for the short ride down, and a chance to admire another of Los Angeles's many freeways. A fleeting glance at the big Hollywood sign on a distant hillside and a walk down Hollywood Boulevard had not satisfied my need for exposure to the movie industry. So we took a behind-the-scenes tour of the Warner Brothers studio complex and back lots. After nearly 100 years in the business, Warner Brothers is so much more than movies these days. As one of the big 5 major American film studios, it's also a leader in animation. Think Bugs Bunny and Looney Tunes. In television, ranging from ER to Friends and Big Bang Theory. In comic books, such as DC Comics, and video game development, just to name some highlights. A busy production board showed shooting projects currently occupying 20 sound stages. You may recognize some of these shows. Some, like The Ellen Show, have live audiences. But it never occurred to us guys to request tickets. Instead, we boarded a tour vehicle that would let us check out a few of the, count them, 10 backlots spread across 110 acres. We passed by Stage 18, which was displaying a sign that said Closed Set. From the production board, we had learned that the new TV series Abbott Elementary was being shot there. But Stage 18 proudly displayed a long list of feature films and TV shows that had used this venerable soundstage since its construction in 1926. We did find a soundstage that was open, but it had been stripped bare, as is customary when a show wraps up its shooting. All sets and lighting had been removed, and the cavernous space was left ready for a new project to move in. We passed other sound stages, endlessly I thought, Some even had special security posted outside. A tent had been erected outside this one, most likely for the caterer. Here's a large stage building that was being used for set construction, probably serving multiple projects. But we were tired of seeing closed doors, so we went in search of outdoor settings. Soon we found ourselves in the middle of a small town in which nothing was real. Parts of this town square had been used in hundreds of productions through the years. For fans of the TV show Friends, this fountain and sofa would be familiar from the opening credits. And like a magnet, it drew passing posers. Different facades created varied settings, sometimes side by side. The various neighborhoods were fun to look at. We had probably seen them all before. See any you'd like to buy? Here's a commercial strip that could be anywhere. We went inside one home that was more than a facade. It was what they call a practical, but it's not very livable. It has no ceiling and no electricity, but power can be brought in and lights hung, and air conditioning can be added to compensate for the hot lights. This kitchen could be anywhere, and probably has been. Now we're in New York. City Hall or a courthouse? Take your pick. Every town needs a movie theater. This one actually works. On our walking tour, Hollywood's costumers had a chance to show off. From fancy gowns and wedding finery to double-breasted suits and dresses of another era, to Academy Award-winning ascot race attire from the 1964 musical My Fair Lady. And we dare not forget superheroes and other colorful characters. Have you noticed set designers seem to make sofas the focal point of apartment-based sitcoms? Welcome to the Big Bang Theory. I was fascinated with all aspects of movie magic. We learned how digital effects can be shot on green screen stages and layered to add full background detail. We were shown scale models that on the big screen appear full size. And if you are into Batmobiles, these are full size. Now it's our turn to take the stage and wrap up what had proven to be a most interesting tour of movie making behind the scenes. That evening, we were joined by Tony's old political friend Tim Kelly for a most enjoyable Italian dinner. It was our second visit to Michelli's, which we discovered had live music and a singing waitstaff. To prove it, here's our waiter. On our last morning in Los Angeles, I was determined to see the Pacific Ocean, so we drove out to the Santa Monica Pier. Tony assured me there was an ocean on the other side of this amusement complex, and eventually I got a glimpse of it. But it wasn't until I was airborne on my return to Nashville that I really got a good view of the ocean. Looking back, it had been a jam-packed sightseeing trip, starting with Ice Age fossils and ending with a singing waiter. Tony had put together a wonderfully varied itinerary, but there's always more to see. As someone associated with this area once said, "I'll be back."